We've got Rex in South Carolina, which of the Carolinas is the southern one. Rex is wondering, is it reasonable to believe that it is possible that we're living in a simulation? Rex, how can we help?
What's going on, Rex?
Yeah. How you guys doing? So I
never had a bad day, man.
About this the other day. Right. I got to think about this the other day, talking to a buddy about just the progression of technology. And what I was thinking was just like, hey, at some point in the future, if technology advances exponentially the way it's doing now, you got to think at some point you would approach unlimited computing power. And it's quite possible to not only simulate the Big Bang, but tweak it enough. And in doing so in a simulation, you essentially make the multiverse. You're a god at that point to this simulation. But at the same time, if you could simulate something and you also find that there was no other option for how everything turned out, you've essentially made a reliable model that predicts your future. And in any case, if your computing power is completely unlimited, you could simulate to the point that, I mean, you just have it just recasts itself over and over again. And you get to the whole problem of hard solipsism. Like, I know that we could never know that. It's unfalsifiable, but at the same time, it seems to be reasonable for me to think that the way things progress and, somehow we make it thousands of years in the future, if you did this thing, then you've kind of broke the whole thing. You create the multiverse. I'm not really sure where it goes from there.
So what specifically are you actually asking? Like, does it make sense to believe this thing because I can't prove that it isn't possible?
Well, no, I guess does it become more reasonable? Do you allow it to become a possibility? Whereas, hard solipsism, technically, yeah, it's possible but it's not at the same time, right? It's like there is no way to falsify it.
I think that I would make a very careful distinction between the word possible and the word probable, likely, reasonable, meaningful, any of those things. Because, lots of things are possible. Like what you just said, you can take it ad absurdum and say, oh, well, if we had a computer that could do this, if we had this kind of tech, if my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bike. It would be, you can go as far as you want with it. But at the end of the day, I can say that about absolutely anything. And as you said, it's unfalsifiable. There's no way for me to even prove that it's possible, that this is possible, that this is possible. And if I gave you proof positive that wasn't true, you could say, well, that's part of the simulation too. So it just doesn't matter is really the question for me.
Yeah. And the question that you're asking of, is it reasonable to believe? I think no. And I think I may be able to demonstrate this by just taking the scenario that you're suggesting that there's this infinite computing power creating a simulation that you find yourself in. So just add something silly to that. Is it possible all of that and that whatever computing power is in charge of that simulation is going to have a pink elephant flat on my ass in 5 minutes? Is it reasonable to believe that? Just because, it's hypothetical. I don't know if it's possible. I don't think it's reasonable to believe that because returning to the first caller with our esteemed colleague we just got off the phone with, I think that for belief to be reasonable, it has to be justified by some evidence. But that's my bias talking.
And I hear that, and that's kind of where I start to break out too. But then it kind of lends itself to that if a thing is trending in a direction, does that become evidence there? Because like the guy was saying before, that if you believe tomorrow is going to be a good day, are you justified in believing it because every day has gotten better up till then? Was I think your guys' example. So in kind of that thinking. I believe technology will advance to this point where we essentially simulate the Big Bang and simulate the entire universe, in which case, it's a computer program. So we can go to any timestamp along the timeline and see how things progress and see if it could be any other way, I imagine science would ultimately move towards that goal. I think that would be the biggest piece in the why is everything. So in that, now I have motivation and I have ability, and does that lend more to, like, it's rational to believe that, of course, we're heading that direction, but that we'll ever get there, I guess is where I'm going with.
It very quickly descends into an episode of Black Mirror, and we get into this situation where we're just arguing over the semantics of different words, where it's like, well, is it a belief, or is it a knowledge, or is it an expectation, or is it faith? I think, at the end of the day, like we said a second ago, you can absolutely end that sentence with anything you want. At a certain point, our science will get to a certain point where we can create the Big Bang, and we can tweak it in this way and that way, and we can make the laws of physics be whatever we want them to be. And maybe this is just a different law of physics and the actual law of physics in the actual world that's running the simulation, and therefore nothing we do here really matters. And at a certain point, you have to grapple with the fact that this whole belief system, this whole idea that you have, hinges on the very first word, which is if. And
that's huge.
That's the whole part of it. It's just if, and then anything else, sure. But we're looking for what is actually here, what is real, and what we can prove. And maybe we are in some crazy simulation. We're a brain in a vat being fed, blah, blah, blah. But at the very least, as I think it was Descartes who said, I think, therefore I am. The one thing I can prove for sure is what I can prove for sure around me. I can prove that I exist, and I know what's going on in my reality here. At the very least, I can hinge on that. Everything else is just if.
Yeah. And that's why we would say you don't ever want to put Descartes before the horse.
Nice.
Rex, you reminded me of something. Yeah. So, because I understand that science is trending toward, more and more powerful computing all the time. I don't know, though, if there's a limit to where that computing power can go, if there's an upper limit to it. I don't know if getting to a point where, creating something like this simulation you're talking about is truly possible. And you reminded me of something. This may or may not be relevant, but it could be useful to some of our listeners. So have you ever been in a casino, Rex?
Many times.
Have you ever seen someone at a roulette table seeing that the ball keeps coming up on red? So they're like, okay, so it's going to come up on black next time, or it's going to keep coming up on red. And they'll tell themselves that because of past events that they can predict what's going to happen next.
Yes, I'm aware. I do horrible things like that as well.
I've done it too.
Yeah, no,
I've done it too.
We all do.
Seen people at a slot machine, and they're like, I can't keep losing forever. The next one's got to hit, right?
It's got to level out, right?
There are so many ways that our intuitions about stuff can just lead us to poor decision making and poor conclusions. So when I'm thinking about when is it this is why when I think about when is it reasonable to believe something, it has to be about evidence, because I know that my intuitions can make me bet on red when there's no good reason for me to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense.
So that's where just, I understand where your intuitions are here, and they could be correct. I've placed bets for shitty reasons and had them pay out before, and and it's sort of nice when that happens, but at the same time, it's bad because it reinforces the poor decision making. So I would just say that when you're asking, is it reasonable to believe this hypothetical? I would just urge you to stick with, I don't know, until you've got evidence.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't mean like completely tip the scales, but is it useful? Not at all, because it becomes unfalsifiable. But is it? I guess what I was just saying is, if you're 100% leaning to not possible, and then you're like, well, this kind of offsets it just a smudge. But you brought up some good points. I mean,
Forrest, how do you offset the unfalsifiable though? When you're making assessments about what is.
Yeah, I mean I don't think you do. Yeah, that's.
Yeah. Well,
and again, the utility of it really doesn't lend any credibility to it at all. So it's hard to say. Yeah, it turns out.
Shit. Michael, I hope this has been helpful, and if not helpful, at least useful in some entertainment value type of sense.
And Rex, I hope you don't mind that he just called you Michael.
Oh, I'm looking at the call screen thing. Sorry about that, Rex. That's my bad. I'm getting ahead of myself.
It's totally fine. So, yeah, well, no, I appreciate it, guys. I'll let you move on to other things. And that previous call, I can sense you guys, there was a lot of frustration there.
It got heavy,
really
yo.
I'm sure there was frustration on both sides.
You cut away everything, and the only thing that was left was indoctrination. I mean, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what happened there. And he's a person that, you know, I don't want to speak for him, but at this is a key point in his life where he either looks back and says, oh, these are really bad reasons, or he doubles down. And it's just interesting to see a call like that on air where you guys literally just cut away everything, and the only thing was left was I believe because I believe, and there was no reason. So I know it's frustrating, but
maybe he'll think about it and call back in future weeks with a reason. But hey, in the meantime, you have a great rest of your day and a great week, Rex. Sorry for calling you Michael.
You too, guys.
All right.
Take care, man.